All right, another rhetorical mode, and we're on to another assignment too. The new topic, of course, relates to deductive logic, the topic that we put off in our other videos and really throughout the semester. Not that we're making a judgment about it, but usually it's treated after talking about inductive logic. Remember, we're comparing these two just by a rough comparison. You can tell that there's a big difference in how they begin. Inductive logic we've looked at before. That's where we take the facts of existence, fact, and conclude some general law or conclusion from that set of facts. You might remember, Samuel Scudder, there comes my fish swimming in. And of course, I want you to be thinking in terms of that as we progress into this new kind of thinking. Not new at all, but we're giving a name to it, and just as before, we're trying to apply some new vocabulary and to think about it with some new tools. Deductive logic begins with a major premise, usually an abstraction, assumption, definition, belief, rule, even a prayer. It starts with something that's more abstract. It doesn't start with a fact. It starts with something that we're actually exploring or taking a look at, and then it proceeds with a minor premise, or maybe several minor premises, a situation, a context, some specifics that it adds to it, and there should be another parenthesis there. And then it reaches a conclusion. Now, you see the big differences in how deductive begins. There are other slight differences that we could take a look at. But for starters, let's just focus on the fact that it begins with an abstraction. It begins with something that is much more general, sometimes vague, though it'll be defined through the specifics of the argument. And that's what we really want to think of when we think of the differences between inductive and deductive. All right. Let's begin a more in-depth comparison with this slide. Inductive, of course, we've got the first row really telling us the thing that we had in the previous slide. Nothing new there. It starts with specifics, it ends with a rule or conclusion. Deductive, it starts with a rule or abstraction and applies the rule to specifics. With inductive logic, discoveries are made with more facts. With deductive logic, discoveries are made by applying the rule and seeing whether it works. And notice the emphasis is really on that rule, as we'll elaborate on in a future slide. Inductive logic uses reasoning, of course. Deductive logic also uses reasoning. There's nothing different there. Inductive logic has fallacies, and deductive logic also has fallacies. We don't have to spend too much time studying them in this class, but the point being made here is that there are such edges of reason or boundaries that we ought to have a care with, and that's about as much as I'll say on that subject, except to say that some of the deductive fallacies will be self-evident. We'll know them right away. The goal for inductive reasoning is to create the best conclusion possible. The goal really for deductive reasoning usually is to see whether the abstractions work, and that indicates whether an argument is sound, more vocabulary, and the process of reasoning works, that it's valid. Two more words to add to our vocabulary. With deductive argument, we have the soundness of the abstraction and also the validity of the steps of the reasoning. With inductive logic, we have a conclusion that's probable, often highly probable. With deductive logic, the conclusion is certain if we accept premises and the reasoning. As I say over on the right-hand side, we say over on the right that neither is better. They're really just used for different things. There are different applications which are more suitable for each. So don't get into the habit that I've delayed this long because we're building up to the best kind of argument. It's really that we're focusing on a different genre, a different type, and ought to spend a little bit of time treating it differently. Deductive logic seems easy enough, right? No problems there, except there are little subtleties. Consider why we do it. We do it in part to make our assumptions and definitions very clear. In fact, sometimes the beginning is the focus of our deductive logic. That's the thing that we emphasized when we talked about how it's different from inductive logic. We've got to explore the rule. And oftentimes it's the exploration of the rule that makes up deductive logic. We explore this, of course, in a video. That's in the next video, the link that you'll get next that I'll talk about in class. Think about this as a deductive argument. Be nice, work hard. Good deductive argument for all of us, I think. And we get in the video one case example of deductive reasoning and teaching for it. You might recall your own 5th and 6th grade and think back to the kinds of rules or lessons that you got. Much more complicated actually when you're living through a rule than when you look at it from a distance of time or place, and you think it's easy. And look at these 5th and 6th graders and tell me whether it's so easy.